So, something that sets me apart from a lot of other people that have been to prison is I was allowed to self surrender. So, what that means is I spent a year in jail on state charges, got federal indictments during that time. I was sentenced to drug court, which is a program, and what my lawyer worked out would be that I would be allowed to do the drug court program while on bond for federal charges. So, I stayed out, and that actually helped extend the case a little bit longer because I used that as a means of I was getting treatment, so it put off my sentencing for longer. That's why I was able to stay out like 2 years on bond. I got to train Kempo karate, open to close during that time. I got to 6 days a week. I got to take a college class on corrections with a bunch of to-be police officers and probation and COs. That was interesting. I was the only person in there that had been to jail before, so that was interesting. But when I got sentenced, I'll talk about that in another video. I'll keep that dry. But what they did was they gave me 5 months to self-surrender. Self-surrender means you walk right up to the prison. You turn yourself in, so you don't go to jail. You don't go to receiving. You walk right to the front door of the prison. And you say, "Hey, I'm here, ready to go to prison now," and they let you in, and change you out. So you can imagine. Now, ultimately, I did 5 years in federal prison, but I got a year of credit for the jail that I had done. I got a year off for what is called RDAP. It is a drug program that is in the prison. It's a 9-month drug program, and I got a year off for good time. Am I boring you, girl? I'm sorry. So, imagine you have to, for 5 months, I was given a 96-month sentence. In the feds, that's how they do it. They tell you how many months you have, and I'll do another video on that. But anyway, so for 5 months, I know that I have to turn myself in on an 8-year sentence, and I've done the math. I figure that I should do probably around 4.5, 5 years. Once I do the drug program, once they factor in jail credit, all that stuff, I had that figured out. But a lot of time with the computers and stuff, that stuff wasn't taken off automatically. For my first couple years in there, they didn't have my jail time accredited, and that's a whole nother story in itself. But imagine knowing you have to walk into a prison willingly. You have to walk in willingly to turn yourself into prison where you're going to live for possibly the next 8 years. Okay? It's enough to make about anybody crack up. Now, for the first 4 months out of the 5 months that I had, once they sentenced me to the time I self-surrendered. They gave me 5 months to self-surrender because I had not graduated drug court yet. And they wanted to allow me to graduate drug court, which I did. I was one of the speakers. There's a funny speech that I gave at the graduation that's online. It's back from 2012. And it's actually the picture I used in one of the things. I've got a suit on and my hands out like that. That's a picture from the drug court graduation. But anyway, I kept it together. I blocked it out for 4 months. 1 month from having to turn myself into prison, it got real. I realized, oh God, 30 days. Oh God, 29 days. It started really freaking out, Now, like I said, now I'm not going to claim, like I told you guys, first 6 months I was in prison, I drank. And, I drank during that time too. A good little bit. I hadn't done heroin since April 9th, 2010. I did drink during that time. And what my mom did was she took me to a psychiatrist because I must have been impossible. She felt bad for it. She was cracking up too, probably a little bit. But the psychiatrist ultimately prescribed me Xanax. So the Xanax helped a little bit. It did help a good bit. Straight up, it took a lot. It took it down a notch. But it doesn't fix anything. I'm getting ready to go live in prison for the next 8 years, and I've got to walk in the door willingly. So I make it, and it's the day that I am supposed to go turn myself into prison. Well, what do I need to leave any Xanax left in the bottle for? So I took a few more than I was supposed to. As we kept getting closer, I kept getting more anxiety. Well, I took a few milligrams of Xanax. As you might imagine, it wasn't to get, I want to get messed up. It was because I literally felt like I was going to have a heart attack. For real. Like, I mean, I'm turning myself into prison. It wasn't as much the fear of everything with prison. It was the fact that I'm going to be stuck in this place. I'm not going to have the internet. I'm not going to have a phone. I'm not going to have all this stuff. I'm going to be stuck in here. And also, yeah, I guess some fears about possible stuff that could happen. And like I said, I'd watch that Alabama documentary about, the Fleece Johnson and all that other stuff too. So, I mean, but I'd trained the Kempa. I was ready, and everything else. So I had this whole image of prison and what it was going to be. What I'd heard, what I'd seen. But, so, I get there, and they're like, I guess they didn't expect I was an inmate to be, and I'm like, I'm here at the self-surrender. They're like, oh, it was actually kind of like that Orange is the New Black when how she self-surrendered. That was the same situation that happened to me. Kind of funny now to think about. There's a few similarities in that, odd similarities, but anyway. So what they do is they take me down to, what's called R&D, and that's where they release people and where they do intake. So they get all my information. They have psychiatrists talk to me. They have staff members talk to me. They asked about this, which I have a Kempo karate tattoo. It's a T with a dragon. They asked if that was some type of a gang tattoo. The one guy's like, hadn't seen any of you guys. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, that. And I'm like, that's traditional Kempo. He's like, well, I hadn't seen many of you guys members around here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he thought to God, and I couldn't convince him different. But after talking to the other, I guess the prison police, I convinced them it's not a gang tattoo. I promise you. And I was kind of, I could keep it together because if I came in and I was noticeably intoxicated, they would put me immediately in the shoe, in the hole. That's where I would have spent my first 30 days if they'd noticed anything. It was like, I just seemed like probably like a slow person. Like I was like maybe a little bit mentally slow because of the Xanax. But I was able to keep it together. And they're like, well, you look really tired. My eyes were like, and I'm like, I haven't slept. I've been really worried about coming to prison. And I probably just seemed like I was a slow guy. So they put me through, they get me dressed out, get, my khaki clothes, which I'm wearing, and they put all my stuff on this cart. Now we walk out onto the compound. Now this is the low security. It's not like a regular compound. The buildings are not 4 feet high and everything else. These look like regular buildings, like you'd see in the middle of a city, kind of like in a historic district. The first building I went to was about 3 floors high and about a football field long. Huge building. Now, that's the building. A lot of time they store people at that until beds come open in the rest of the housing units, but people do live there permanently too. And it's like a grid system, okay? So when I say a grid system, you know how like you've got city blocks. So the center of the compound, if you can imagine, there's 2 buildings here. Let's see. Yeah. There's 1 building off in the corner. Then there's 2 buildings, 1 building. So and there's sidewalks in between. It's like a city, like walking around a city block. There are no cameras at the low, and I kept looking, I'm like, I wonder where the camera, they must have cameras hidden everywhere. And I found out they don't have cameras anywhere. But like the whole time, like my first week in there, I was convinced they had secret hidden cameras all over the low security. They didn't have 1 camera in there, but I was so convinced. I was like, they couldn't have no camera. How could they have no cameras in here? But they didn't. And, I'm observing everything, taking it all in, trying to walk a completely straight line, trying not to fall asleep on myself. So we get inside the building. The building is not like a regular building, like an open jail pod. It's not like that at all. So you walk in, it's about a 10 or 15 foot hallway. There's 3 desks with 3 computers. The computers are for email and also for the MP3 players. Yeah, you could buy MP3 players. Didn't know that, did you? And you could download songs on them like an iTunes type setup. They cost about $1.50 a song. It's something very interesting. Wasn't expecting to get MP3 players. Listen to my System of a Down and Hatebreed in prison. So, just like there's a set of stairs behind me. As soon as you walk in, there was an open door. It was propped open, but there's the open area. Immediately to the right, there's a set of stairs. Now, at the top of that stairs, it's about a 20 by 20 foot open area, and that's where I'm taken to. There's a 20 by 20 foot area. It's just an open area. It's an open TV room. There's two TVs against that wall. On the far wall, there's a door. There's a TV room in there. So we go to the end, and there's 2 hallways, one to the left, one to the right. We go to the left. We open it up. It's a quadrant. There are 4 quadrants on the bottom part and on the upper part. It's a 35-man open dormitory with cubicles, 4-foot-high cubicles with 4-man rooms down the center, 3 of them. Around the perimeter were 2-man rooms. I don't know how this happened. I think they put me on a bottom bunk because they thought I was slow and maybe I'd fall off and break my neck. But it worked out in my favor because I started out immediately on a bottom bunk. That's something that doesn't happen. And in a 2-man room. Almost everybody gets put in a 4-man room starting out. So that was very unusual. Now, in this quadrant 2, the bathrooms. Each quadrant had a bathroom, and it wasn't open. It wasn't open. People couldn't see you going to the bathroom. There was a doorway. You walk in the doorway, and this is where the fights would happen. It's about 15 foot by about 30 foot. There's 2 urinals, 2 stalls with locks on them. You can take a dump with the door locked. I was thinking it was going to be like a jail cell. At the medium, which I ended up going to, it was like that. But this was not at the low. To the left, it's just a wall that goes about 10 foot back, and then to the right are showers that you walk in. Now, the showers have a wall that's like 10 foot back. So, I mean, you have to walk 10 foot with walls on both sides to get in the shower. So, if somebody ambushed you in the shower, only one person could get to you at a time. So, I'm just trying to paint a picture of what this place looks like. So, I get in there, put my stuff down. I get approached by this group of guys. Now, this part's kind of funny. I heard don't accept anything from anybody in prison. They're going to try to get that butt they give you something. Don't you ever take nothing. Somebody leaves a honey bun on your pillow, you throw that mother back. You tell them, not me. Because there's some sayings like people will take a honey bun and take a marker and make a tiny little mark on it. And if you eat that honey bun, they're like, so I want my honey bun back. And they're like, you eat my honey bun? And you give them a different honey bun back? They're like, nah, I gave you one with the mark on it. I don't know who falls for that and's like, well, I guess I ate his honey bun. I have to give my butt up now. I don't know in what world that happens, but apparently it must happen somewhere. Maybe it's just a myth. But anyway, I heard these rumors. I watched it turn out in prison thing and everything else. I get approached by these 4 dudes. Now, the 3 of the dudes are just middle-aged white dudes, like 50 years old. I knock every one of them out. I'm not worried about them. But there's this one dude who's about 35, who's 6'8", about 230 pounds. White guy. That's a bunch of white guys, and they got like this look. They got this handful of stuff they're trying to give me. It's like, shower stuff and everything else. And they're like, we'd like to give. I said, I bet you would. I said, you can keep that. They're like, no. We give this to the new guys who come. Hey, nah, you ain't gonna get me. I said, I'll mess you up. I said, I'll knock every one of you out. You come the wrong one. Later, I would find out that was a Christian group that gives stuff to it's a few white guys that look out for some of the new white inmates that get there. Just a nice group of guys trying to give me some stuff. I thought they were trying to get my butt. They weren't. It made it very awkward between those guys for the rest of the time that I was there. We just didn't talk. They just ignored me. They thought I was a complete prick. Except for the really tall guy. We actually ended up becoming friends and actually working out together. Dude was strong, so I mean, I was right to be nervous by this dude. He's former military, like, big man. He's a big man. And, those big men that, like, their jaw looks different, like their head, like, is elongated, like the freaking head is stretched. Yeah, he had like that, like he had some type of pituitary issue or something. Like, what I'm talking about with the jaw? Like the dude on The Longest Yard, that big dude they had back in the hole. Who's got that jaw? Like, oh, sorry. Well, he didn't talk like that. He talked in a normal voice, but he had that elongated jaw that the big people have. So anyway, I get approached by this dude. He is on the other side. People call him Tex. He's got a big old goatee, chubby white dude. He's helped me out, figure stuff out, and his cellmate is a store man. Now, I know about a store man. A store man ain't going to try to do nothing. He's a frail old man who's like in his mid to late 60s. So I'm like, what's up? How much do you charge? And I do borrow some stuff off him because he's a store man. He's a known store man. And he's an old man. What's he going to do? You know what I mean? So, and I'm going to pay him back. I'm talking about what's he going to do in terms of, is he a predator? Do I have to worry about borrowing something from this guy and him expecting something? So, I didn't take any handouts. I went to the store man, got something, and I did pay him back with interest. And he was a very good old man. He looked out for me a lot, and I'm going to talk about him later. But Tex takes me down, helps me get my phone set up. Now, in order to get your phone set up, before we did that, I saw the case manager. Very nice woman. I'm not going to say the name, but anyway, this prison mostly was black run. It was probably 75 to 80% black staff. A lot of staff were racist, but my case manager was a very sweet black woman who was just incredible. She was absolutely phenomenal. One of the best staff members you could ever hope for. She was a blessing. For everything good she was, the counselor was everything she wasn't. So, it was a double-edged sword on this one. So I talked to her. She lets me make a phone call to my mom. My mom just dropped me off, but I'm on the Xanax, you know what I mean? So I'm like, I'm okay, Mom. And she's like, okay, sweetie, I'm glad. I'm like, I just want to let you know. And they all probably think I'm slow because that's how I'm talking, I never abused Xanax, in my life, it wasn't my thing. And, so, my body didn't have any immunity or resistance even, of anything. So, anyway, so, she gives me my number, because you have to have certain numbers, your inmate number, is on an ID that they give you and everything else, but you have to have, a PIN number to put in the phone in order to make phone calls. And every time before you dial out on the phone, you have to punch in your inmate number, and then you have to dial the phone number. Then I had to set it up, and I had to say my name. And I have to say my name, and every time I use the phone from that day on, whenever it says for me to say my name, I have to say my name. Well, because I took the Xanax and I can't talk right, I'm like, spend some mom power. And actually, I didn't say that. For some reason, I was worried my enemies were going to find me there. I said my name was something that it wasn't. I forgot this detail. I said, Seth Mumpower. My name isn't Seth. Okay? There was a comment in the comment section that actually, this was technically a nickname that everybody called me for a very long time. Everybody that I met in there, the Xanax, calmed me down, but it also made me a little bit paranoid, and I thought, well, in this state, I can't defend myself, so if I have any enemies here, I don't want them to know I'm here. I want to see them before they see me. And plus, I looked different. I was, had more muscle on me than, from before. So anyway, because I lifted in jail, then I lifted once I was free. But I really got fit and strong when I was in the low security prison because they had weights there. But anyway, so I got to say, Seth, Mom Power, every time I want to make this phone call. So every time I tried to make a phone call after this day, I had to say my name 20 times and say it in the same stupid voice. I had to go, Seth, Mom Power, to make a phone call. So that was a nightmare. For 5 years, I had to use that same stupid voice. You get one shot at the recording of the voice. So this guy Tex takes me to the counselor. And he tells me, knock on the door, gonna. And he set me up to get a laugh out of me here. I don't know that this counselor's a prick. Apparently, he'd been working with the union for 27 years at this time. He retired when I was there. He retired at 30 years, 3 years after. But I knocked on his door and walked in, and there's this black guy. He's stocky, but he's got a big old gut on him. Bald head, little goatee, and he's sitting in his chair. I knock on the door, and I walk in, and I say, hello, Mr. So-and-so. And he had this column in his office. And I propped up on the column because with the Xanax, I needed to prop up on something. I said, hello, Mr. So-and-so. He said, who the hell are you? What the hell are you doing in my office? Back the hell up. Except he said the F word instead of hell. And I said, whoa, holy. And he said, what do you want? What do you want? You new? You just get here? I said, yeah. He said, come back at 7 o'clock. Get the hell out of my office. Get the hell out. Except he said the F word instead of hell. But anyway, so I walk out and I look at Tex and I'm like, what just happened? He's like, that's Mr. So-and-so. I went back at 7. Of course, he goes home at 6. That's why he told me to come at 7. So, yeah, and this guy was a complete nightmare, complete racist prick, awful to deal with. Took me 3 months to get my visitation list through, and I had to go over his head to do that. And when I went over his head to do that, I warned him. I said, "My birthday's coming up next week. I want to get a visit." He's like, "I ain't hiding your visitation." I said, "They've been sending multiple times." I said, "Please, man, come on, help me." And I said, "And you don't even have to have visitation forms come in, because if they're on your pre-sentence report, which is in your paperwork saying they're your family, they get put on automatically." So I told him, "I'm going to go to Miss so-and-so." He said, "F Miss so-and-so. I run this prison." And he kind of did. Everybody was scared of him because he was the union rep. So even though he was just a petty little counselor in one of 7 buildings at the low security where he was the union rep, he had a whole lot of weight that he could use against a lot of people that were underlings, but not against this woman who's the unit manager, and not against a lot. He didn't have as much juice as he said or he'd like to think he had, but he did have some juice. That's my point. Well, I went to her, and apparently she did something. While I was in the bathroom, he'd been around the building twice looking for me. When I walked out, he goes, "There you are, you mother. What the you think I'm doing? Holding your visitation forms?" I said, "Mr. So-and-so, my birthday's in 2 weeks. I've waited 3 months just to get my initial family on my visitation. I just want to see my family." He said, "Keep on effing with me. I'll send you to Lee Hall." And that's where the derogatory word for gay people, that's where they are at. He says, "I'm going to put you in the open dorm." He said, "They got a big old shower down there. They're all night in that shower. You're going to have to listen to skin slapping in that shower all night with your bed right next to it. I'm going to make sure. Keep on effing with me. That's what's going to happen to you." And in Lee Hall, it was a giant building that was a football field long. It was 3 floors high plus a basement. And in the basement of it, they had this big open shower. It was like 15 by 15 foot. With a doorway with a curtain on it. And during the day, one person at a time. Nobody uses a community shower. Even if it is a giant shower, somebody puts their towel over it and only one person goes in at a time. There were no community showers at all, anywhere in the medium, low, or camp at all. It wasn't a thing. Okay, if 2 people went in the shower, they're going to think that you're gay. I mean, just that's what it is. So, anyway, he threatened me at that. That wasn't on my first day, but figured I'd tell that a little bit. So I go in my cellie, he sees me, and I'm falling asleep on myself, and apparently I learned the next day, that he slapped me in the face and went, hey, yo, you okay? And then I'm just like, and he seemed like he didn't like me for the first 3 days, and he prayed. It was the first experience I've had around a Muslim, really. He prayed in the middle of the night. I'd get up 3, 4 a.m. He'd be praying. He was a devout Muslim. But anyway, 3 days later, he said something like, "Oh, man, something, so-and-so." And I made a joke that made him laugh. And we hadn't really talked at all for 3 days. It was just awkward. He was on the top bunk. I was on the bottom bunk. I just minded my business. I didn't talk to him. He seemed like he didn't like me. But after I cut that joke up, he goes, "Mom, pal," he said, "you're all right, aren't you?" He said, you was on something that day when you came in, wasn't you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Dude, I took Xanax before." I said, "Imagine self-reporting on an 8-year sentence." I mean, I said, I had a prescription for Xanax that I took regularly leading up to it. And I said, whatever was left in that bottle the day of, I took it to keep from having a heart attack. And like, "You're all right." And we got along after that. Also, another stupid thing I did. Okay, at the low security on the top part, there is a TV room that is an exclusively all-black TV room. Each room gets 2 plastic chairs with the number of your room written on it. So you have what is your chair that you can take to and from your room. But sometimes people leave their chairs in the TV room because that's the only TV room they sit in. Usually people get a spot in a TV room, and you have to kind of be wheeled a spot. When somebody goes home, they leave you their spot, and you put it in the same spot every time. Now, somebody can sit down in that chair, but when you get there, you tap them. But this TV room's all black, and it's a lot of old convicts, and if you sit in their chair, they're ready to fight. Well, I go in there, and I just plop down. There's this big guy who they call Big Shaq. He's like 6'6", 300 pounds. He's sitting there, and this other guy, and they just sitting there looking at me like, and kickboxing's on. And I'd done these little amateur kickboxing contests that were in school before I went in there. It was just in-school competitions. It wasn't anything serious. And and I'm like, I said, I had a few little amateur fights doing this, and blah blah blah. And they're just looking at me. And I had a talk with him later, and he said, "You was on something that day, wasn't you? Everybody asked me that later on because they all ended up liking me later, but that day they didn't know what to think about me. But like I said, imagine turning yourself in on an 8-year sentence. Whatever Xanax were left in the bottle, you were going to be eating. If you've never been to prison and you have to willingly walk in the door on an 8-year sentence, you're going to be eating whatever leftover Xanax are in that bottle. So I could have got beat up that time. Didn't happen. Got lucky. Went to the kitchen, was falling asleep, and Fox, who ended up being my buddy, he was like the only guy on that side who was like close to my age. Like the average person in this building was like in their mid-40s, okay? There weren't a whole lot of young guys, and he was like the only white dude who's close to my age. He was like 28, 29. At this time, I was like 22, 23. So he's about 240, 6'3", bald-headed white guy with muscle. You know, just one of those big bone people that's muscular anyway, but, you know, he worked out a good bit too. Last I heard from him, he was working as a head bouncer at a hotel, so that tells you the dude's big. And we'd always get into it. We'd always end up getting in wrestling and everything else, and, you know, I got to pull some of my jiu-jitsu and, you know, some of the things. Not jiu-jitsu, but just the basic grappling I learned at the karate school. You know, we played back and forth on stuff. He was a good friend. So he got me, you know, we talked, and I think a lot of people tried to make friends with me because where I came in kind of not really all there, I think everybody assumed that maybe I had something, you know, in my prison wallet and that they could get something from me later. I didn't. I wasn't involved in that. It wasn't. I just took the rest of those Xanax that were in the bottle so I didn't have a heart attack when I got to prison. So I think some people want to be friends with me just in case I did have something. So it was like, it seemed like, because I watched people get in after that, and looking back on it, I thought, man, a lot of people came up and talked to me that day, and I seemed like an unapproachable person that day. Like, if you saw me outside in the condition I was in there, if you saw me in the free world, you would not approach me. You'd be like, that dude needs to go sit down somewhere. So I went to the kitchen to go eat dinner. Apparently, I'm like falling asleep. He's waking me. He's like, dude, they'll put you in the shoe. They'll put you in the hole. So he helped walk me back, you know, get back in, and I conk out, pass out. Now, the old man, the old store man, old man Gobble, he's like approaching 70 years old. They have something called a call-out sheet. So every evening they pass out this sheet. They put it where they've got a mailbox, like those old mailboxes, like on the wall that you put the mail in. You can't pull people's mail out. It's like, you know, just only somebody has to take a key to open it. Well, behind that, they put these two pieces of paper on the downstairs and the upstairs, and it's a list, alphabetical list of names of everybody on the compound and your appointment. So if you have a dentist appointment, if you have a doctor's appointment, if you are supposed to be here, supposed to be there, it will have your name, it will have the time of your appointment, it will have the location of your appointment. Well, I've just gotten to prison. I was out in the free world. I'm not used to checking this thing every day. Well, old man Gobble, he looked at me. I think he looked at me like a kid, or like his kid or something, or like his grandkid. He checked that list for me every freaking day, man. And he was really good to do that because I would have been lost. And they helped guide me a lot. Some of the guys in there at the low security. The medium, nothing like that. The medium was trash. It was like Mean Girls, but with tattooed guys that stab each other. It was no good. The low security, though, at the time that I got, well, not even after, when I got back, it was a good bunch of dudes that looked out for people. The medium, you know, there's less respect. Like people, when they say there's less respect, like, okay, I don't do a whole lot of cussing in here, but this just straight up. Okay, you know how, like, you know, you're talking to your boys and stuff, or people, whatever, you're like, man, quit being a bitch, you know, like, that's something you can't say at the medium. You'll get stabbed over that. You'll get beat up over that. Like at the low, sometimes people would talk a little bit more freely. Maybe not that extreme, because that is an extreme word for prison, but say stuff like that. They joke and stuff like that, and because they cut up more, a lot of these people complain about that. But that was what was part of what was cool of it was, you know, that it wasn't like doing time the same as the medium. The medium was like actually doing time. It was miserable. It was terrible. But the low security, man, it was a different type of thing. I mean, it still was prison, and it still sucked, and there still were fights, and there still was drama, and you still got talked to like you were an animal and still got mistreated by guards. But in terms of the people that you dealt with. In terms of the guards' behavior towards you, I saw some guards that were at the medium that were an absolute nightmare. You got them at the low security, they were cool dudes. They left you alone. For real. The same guards that were terrible at the medium were good at the low. It was weird. It was the weirdest concept you've ever seen in your life. So, that's a few of the mistakes I made. Let's just do a quick recap of that. The counselor, I walked in his office. I knocked and I walked right in. I didn't wait for him to say, come on in. I knocked, I waited, I didn't hear anything, so I just walked in. That was a mistake. I made a phone recording while, I was on the Xanax, so then I had to, and keep that in mind. Everybody in this prison called me Seth. I told everybody my name was Seth. For some reason, word gets out when there's a new guy from whatever state, because see, the federal prison, only about 10%, 15% of the guys at Petersburg, Virginia federal prison were from Virginia. There were more guys from North and South Carolina by a lot than there were guys from Virginia. A ton of DC dudes, because I think DC, everything's federal, I believe. So there was hundreds of DC dudes. Okay, there were guys from North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland. Yeah, that's a good handful of the places that I could think of right just off the top of the head. I probably missed something there, but that's a lot of the place. You know what I mean? All those people from all those states get sent there. There was a whole lot of people from Tennessee, So whenever they hear there's somebody from Virginia, somebody will go be like, "Hey, you guys got a new homeboy." So I got worried there'd be somebody from Virginia that I had a problem with that was an enemy of mine, and they'd spot me and maybe they'd take off on me. Especially because where I took the Xanax, I wasn't in fighting shape. So I was worried they'd get at me before I got at them. So I at least wanted to sleep this thing off before I saw who was who and saw if I had any enemies there. There weren't. Later on, couple that were enemies on the street that came into prison. It's weird how that concept kind of flips and turns and twists whenever you're in prison, though. Kind of like Bloods and Crips sometimes work together as a united front in certain prisons. In certain prison stories I heard about, I didn't see that. But, it's certain prison politics change street politics, what I'm saying. But anyway, everybody called me Seth for forever. And when they took my ID picture, I was like, oh, every time I had an ID picture, it was bad. Because remember, I told that story about the regional jail whenever I was faking the seizure so then I could get... Watch that story. That's a funny one, too. I'm not going to give that one up. But I look like I was trying to look like I was, getting ready to fall out of a seizure. Well, this time when I take the, I look like, so my ID, I look like that. And I'm like, man, my ID picture's terrible. So I show the picture to the guys who I'd hung out with, the guy in the 4-man across from me. I show the picture to these guys, and the one guy, Chuck, he goes, Spencer Mum Power? He says, how do you get Seth out of Spencer? And I said, my name isn't Seth, dude. He's like, well, why have we been calling you Seth all this time? And I said, when I first got here, you guys remember, I'd taken the Xanax. I wasn't completely all there, so I was worried. And I told him what I basically explained to you about the enemy thing. And they're like, so we've been calling you Seth for the last 4 or 5 months, and that isn't even your name? And I'm like, yes. And they busted out laughing. And then they asked me, well, what do you want us to call you? And it wasn't 4 months, actually. It was probably about 2 months. 2 months, probably about 2 months, maybe 3, that I got called Seth. And they're like, well, what do you want us to call you? Want us to keep on calling you Seth, or you want us to call you Spence? Because people would say Seth. And I wouldn't respond. So they'd be like, Seth! Seth! And I'd finally realize, oh, they're talking to me. I'm like, yeah. They're like, you got a hearing problem? I said, yeah, I got a hearing problem. I didn't want to admit it. I was embarrassed about it. So people were hollering my name, and they're like, so that's why every time we holler your name, you don't respond back. We have to say your name 4 or 5 times before you answer. And I'm like, yeah. I said, that's why. And we all got a good laugh out of it. But I was Seth for a few months. Yeah. And I was Seth for the whole entire prison stay, according to the phone. So that was something stupid I did. That I sat in the black TV room in somebody else's chair. there were a number of things that I messed up on. It was, I bounced back from it quick. After a few weeks, I got the hang of everything and, fell right in. And, by the end of it, I controlled one of those 7 TVs. I went from about getting beat up for walking in the wrong TV room to actually controlling one of 7 TVs at the end. Adapt and continue. Adapt, survive, and keep on moving forward. That's what I did. But that's a little bit of the whirlwind story that was of my first day in federal prison. It was a mess of a situation. There's a whole bunch more stories about the stuff that happened just the day before, 2 days before, the stuff that happened, not me, but my friends, stuff that they got into that I'll have to tell that story later. But like a couple robberies and stuff like that, that they got involved in, right for them. Not nothing I had nothing to do with, but just I'll leave that for another day. Yeah, just me third party telling that story basically. But anyway, yeah, it was it was quite a day. It was quite a day. Didn't make a good first impression on a lot of people, but ended up becoming, really good friends with a good many of them, days later. Old man Gobble, though, without him, man, he checked that call out sheet. He'd wake me up. Cause see, I don't have a watch. I don't have an alarm clock. How am I supposed to wake up and know what time? You know what I mean? I'm supposed to go to what place? And everything else. He'd let me know and he'd remind me. He was a good dude. But anyway, that's my first day in federal prison.